Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 28, in which Passepartout does not succeed in making anybody listen to reason. The train, on leaving Great Salt Lake at Ogden, passed northward for an hour, as far as Weber River, having completed nearly 900 miles from San Francisco. From this point, it took an easterly direction towards the jagged Wasatch Mountains. It was in the section included between this range and the Rocky Mountains that the American engineers found the most formidable difficulties in laying the road, and that the government granted a subsidy of $48,000 per mile instead of $16,000 allowed for the work done on the plains. But the engineers, instead of violating nature, avoided its difficulties by winding around instead of penetrating the rocks. One tunnel only, 14,000 feet in length, was pierced in order to arrive at the Great Basin. The track up to this time had reached its highest elevation at the Great Salt Lake. From this point, it described a long curve, descending towards Bitter Creek Valley, to rise again to the dividing ridge of the waters between the Atlantic and the Pacific. There were many creeks in this mountainous region, and it was necessary to cross Muddy Creek, Green Creek, and others upon culverts. Passepartout grew more and more impatient as they went on, while Fix, longed to get out of this difficult region, was more anxious than Phileas Fogg himself to be beyond the danger of delays and accidents and set foot on English soil. At 10 o'clock at night, the train stopped at Fort Bridger Station, and 20 minutes later entered Wyoming territory, following the valley of Bitter Creek throughout. The next day, 7th December, they stopped for a quarter of an hour at Green River Station. Snow had fallen abundantly during the night, but, being mixed with rain, it had half melted and did not interrupt their progress. The bad weather, however, annoyed Passepartout, for the accumulation of snow by blocking the wheels of the cars would certainly have been fatal to Mr. Fogg's tour. "What an idea!" he said to himself. "Why did my master make this journey in winter? Couldn't he have waited for the good season to increase his chances?" While the worthy Frenchman was absorbed in the state of the sky and the depression of the temperature, Aouda was experiencing fears from a totally different cause. Several passengers had got off at Green River and were walking up and down the platforms, and among these Aouda recognized Colonel Stamp Proctor, the same who had so grossly insulted Phileas Fogg at the San Francisco meeting. Not wishing to be recognized, the young woman drew back from the window, feeling much alarm at her discovery. She was attached to the man who, however coldly, gave her daily evidences of the most absolute devotion. She did not comprehend, perhaps, the depth of the sentiment with which her protector inspired her, which she called gratitude, but which, though she was unconscious of it, was really more than that. Her heart sank within her when she recognized the man whom Mr. Fogg desired, sooner or later, to call to account for his conduct. Chance alone, it was clear, had brought Colonel Proctor on this train. But there he was, and it was necessary, at all hazards, that Phileas Fogg should not perceive his adversary. Aouda seized a moment when Mr. Fogg was asleep to tell Fix and Passepartout whom she had seen. "That Proctor on this train?" cried Fix. "Well, reassure yourself, madam. Before he settles with Mr. Fogg, he has got to deal with me. It seems to me that I was the more insulted of the two. And besides," added Passepartout, "I'll take charge of him, Colonel as he is." "Mr. Fix," resumed Aouda, "Mr. Fogg will allow no one to avenge him. He said that he would come back to America to find this man. Should he perceive Colonel Proctor, we could not prevent a collision which might have terrible results. He must not see him." "You are right, madam," replied Fix. "A meeting between them might ruin all. Whether he were victorious or beaten, Mr. Fogg would be delayed. And, added Passepartout, that would play the game of the gentlemen of the Reform Club. In 4 days we shall be in New York. Well, if my master does not leave this car during those 4 days, we may hope that chance will not bring him face to face with this confounded American. We must, if possible, prevent his steering out of it." The conversation dropped. Mr. Fogg had just woke up and was looking out of the window. Soon after, Passepartout, without being heard by his master or Aouda, whispered to the detective, "Would you really fight for him?" "I would do anything," replied Fix in a tone which betrayed determined will, "to get him back living to Europe." Passepartout felt something like a shudder shoot through his frame, but his confidence in his master remained unbroken. Was there any means of detaining Mr. Fogg in the car to avoid a meeting between him and the Colonel? It ought not to be a difficult task, since that gentleman was naturally sedentary and little curious. The detective, at least, seemed to have found a way, for after a few moments he said to Mr. Fogg, "These are long and slow hours, sir, that we are passing on the railway." "Yes," replied Mr. Fogg, "but they pass." "You were in the habit of playing whist," resumed Fix, "on the steamers." "Yes, but it would be difficult to do so here. I have neither cards nor partners." "Oh, but we can easily buy some cards, for they are sold on all the American trains. And as for partners, if Madam plays—" "Certainly, sir," Aouda quickly replied. "I understand whist. It is part of an English education." "I myself have some pretensions to playing a good game. Well, here are 3 of us, and a dummy." "As you please, sir," replied Phileas Fogg, heartily glad to resume his favourite pastime, even on the railway. Passepartout was dispatched in search of the steward, and soon returned with 2 packs of cards, some pins, counters, and a shelf covered with cloth. The game commenced. Aouda understood whist sufficiently well, and even received some compliments on her playing from Mr. Fogg. As for the detective, he was simply an adept, and worthy of being matched against his present opponent. "Now," thought Passepartout, "we've got him! He won't budge!" At 11 in the morning, the train had reached the dividing ridge of the waters at Bridger Pass, 7,524 feet above the level of the sea, one of the highest points attained by the track in crossing the Rocky Mountains. After going about 200 miles, the travellers at last found themselves on one of those vast plains which extend to the Atlantic, and which nature has made so propitious for laying the iron road. On the declivity of the Atlantic basin, the first streams... Declivity.
Declivity.
Declivity, a downward slope. On the declivity of the Atlantic basin, the first streams, branches of the North Platte River, already appeared. The whole northern and eastern horizon was bounded by the immense semicircle curtain which is formed by the southern portion of the Rocky Mountains, the highest being Laramie Peak. Between this and the railway extended vast plains, plentifully irrigated. On the right rose the lower spurs of the mountainous mass which extends southward to the sources of the Arkansas River, one of the great tributaries of the Missouri. At 12:30, the travellers caught sight of an instant of Fort Halleck, which commands that section, and in a few more hours the Rocky Mountains were crossed. There was reason to hope then that no accident would mark the journey through this difficult country. The snow had ceased falling, and the air became crisp and cold. Large birds, frightened by the locomotive, rose and flew off in the distance. No wild beast appeared on the plain. It was a desert in its vast nakedness. After a comfortable breakfast served in the car, Mr. Fogg and his partners had just resumed whist when a violent whistling was heard and the train stopped. Passepartout put his head out of the door, but saw nothing to cause the delay. No station was in view. Aouda and Fix feared that Mr. Fogg might take it into his head to get out, but that gentleman contented himself with saying to his servant, "See what is the matter." Passepartout rushed out of the car. 30 or 40 passengers had already descended, amongst them Colonel Stamp Proctor. The train had stopped before a red signal which blocked the way. The engineer and conductor were talking excitedly with a signal man whom the station master at Medicine Bow, the next stopping place, had sent on before. The passengers drew around and took part in the discussion, in which Colonel Proctor, with his insolent manner, was conspicuous.
Conspicuous.
Conspicuous. Standing out as to be clearly visible. Conspicuous. In which Colonel Proctor, with his insolent manner, was conspicuous. Passepartout, joining the group, heard the signalman say, "No, you can't pass. The bridge at Medicine Bow is shaky and would not bear the weight of the train." This was a suspension bridge thrown over some rapids about a mile from the place where they now were. According to the signalman, it was in a ruinous condition, several of the iron wires being broken, and it was impossible to risk the passage. He did not in any way exaggerate the condition of the bridge. It may be taken for granted that, rash as the Americans usually are when they are prudent, there is good reason for it. Passepartout, not daring to apprise his master of what he heard, listened with set teeth, immovable as a statue. "Hum! cried Colonel Proctor. "But we are not going to stay here, I imagine, and take root in the snow?" "Colonel," replied the conductor, "we have telegraphed to Omaha for a train, but it is not likely that it will reach Medicine Bow in less than 6 hours." "6 hours!" cried Passepartout. "Certainly," returned the conductor. "Besides, it will take us as long as that to reach Medicine Bow on foot." "But it is only a mile from here," said one of the passengers. "Yes, but it's on the other side of the river." "And we can't cross, and can't we cross that in a boat?" asked the colonel. "That's impossible. The creek is swelled by the rains. It is a rapid, and we shall have to make a circuit of 10 miles to the north to find a ford." The colonel launched a volley of oaths, denouncing the railway company and the conductor, and Passepartout, who was furious, was not disinclined to make common cause with him. Here was an obstacle, indeed, which all his master's banknotes could not remove. There was a general disappointment among the passengers, who, without reckoning the delay, saw themselves compelled to trudge 15 miles over a plain covered with snow. They grumbled and protested, and would certainly have thus attracted Phileas Fogg's attention if he had not been completely absorbed in his game. Passepartout found that he could not avoid telling his master what had occurred, and with hanging head he was turning towards the car when the engineer, a true Yankee named Forster, called out, "Gentlemen, perhaps there is a way, after all, to get over." "On the bridge?" asked the passenger. "On the bridge." "With our train?" "With our train." Passepartout stopped short and eagerly listened to the engineer. "But the bridge is unsafe," urged the conductor. "No matter," replied Forster. "I think that by putting on the very highest speed, we might have a chance of getting over." "The devil!" muttered Passepartout. But a number of passengers were at once attracted by the engineer's proposal, and Colonel Proctor was especially delighted, and found the plan a very feasible one. He told stories about engineers leaping their trains over rivers without bridges by putting on full steam, and many of those present avowed themselves of the engineer's mind. "We have 50 chances out of 100 of getting over," said one. 80! 90! Passepartout was astounded, and though ready to attempt anything to get over Medicine Creek, thought the experiment proposed a little too American. "Besides," thought he, "there's a still more simple way, and it does not even occur to any of these people. Sir," said he aloud to one of the passengers, "the engineer's plan seems to me a little dangerous, but—" 80 chances, replied the passenger, turning his back on him. "I know it," said Passepartout, turning to another passenger, "but a simple idea." "Ideas are no use," returned the American, shrugging his shoulders, "as the engineer assures us that we can pass." "Doubtless," urged Passepartout, "we can pass, but perhaps it would be more prudent." "What? Prudent?" cried Colonel Proctor, whom this word seemed to excite prodigiously.
Prodigiously.
Prodigiously, remarkably or impressively great in extent, size or degree. Prodigious, unnatural or abnormal.
"What? Prudent?"
cried Colonel Proctor, whom this word seemed to excite prodigiously.
"At full speed, don't you see? At full speed!"
"I know, I see," repeated Passepartout, "but it would be if not more prudent, since that word displeases you, at least more natural.
Whoa! What? What's the matter with this fellow?
Cried several. The poor fellow did not know to whom to address himself.
Are you afraid?
Asked Colonel Proctor.
Afraid? I afraid? Very well. I will show these people that a Frenchman can be as American as they. All aboard!
Cried the conductor.
Yes, all aboard!
Repeated Passepartout, and immediately.
But they can't prevent me from thinking that it would be more natural for us to cross the bridge on foot and let the train come after.
But no one heard this sage reflection, nor would anyone have acknowledged its justice. The passengers resumed their places in the cars. Passepartout took his seat without telling what had passed. The whist players were quite absorbed in their game. The locomotive whistled vigorously. The engineer, reversing the steam, backed the train for nearly a mile, retiring like a jumper in order to take a longer leap. Then, with another whistle, he began to move forward. Chug, 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 chug. The train increased its speed, and soon its rapidity became frightful. A prolonged screech issued from the locomotive. The piston worked up and down 20 strokes to the second. They perceived that the whole train, rushing on at the rate of 100 miles an hour, hardly bore upon the rails at all. As they passed over, it was like a flash. No one saw the bridge. The train leaped, so to speak, from one bank to the other, and the engineer could not stop it until it had gone 5 miles beyond the station. But scarcely had the train passed the river when the bridge, completely ruined, fell with a crash into the rapids of Medicine Bow. Chapter 29, in which certain incidents are narrated which are only to be met with on American railroads. The train pursued its course that evening without interruption, passing Fort Saunders, crossing Cheney Pass, Cheney, or Cheyenne, Cheney Pass. The train pursued its course that evening without interruption, passing Fort Saunders, crossing Cheney Pass, and reaching Evans Pass. The road here attained the highest elevation of the journey, 8,092 feet above the level of the sea. The travelers had now only to descend to the Atlantic by limitless plains leveled by nature. A branch of the Grand Trunk led off southward to Denver, the capital of Colorado. The country round about is rich in gold and silver, and more than 50,000 inhabitants are already settled there. 1,382 miles had been passed over from San Francisco in 3 days and 3 nights. 4 days and nights would more probably bring them to New York. Phileas Fogg was not as yet behindhand. During the night, Camp Walbach was passed on the left. Lodge Pole Creek ran parallel with the road, marking the boundary between the territories of Wyoming and Colorado. They entered Nebraska at 11, passed near Sedgwick, and touched at Julesburg on the southern branch of the Platte River. It was here that the Union Pacific Railroad was inaugurated on the 23rd of October, 1867, by the Chief Engineer, General Dodge. 2 powerful locomotives carrying 9 cars of invited guests, among whom was Thomas C. Durant, Vice President of the road, stopped at this point. Cheers were given. The Sioux and Pawnees performed an imitation Indian battle. Fireworks were let off, and the first number of the Railway Pioneer was printed by a press brought on the train. Thus was celebrated the inauguration of this great railroad, a mighty instrument of progress and civilization thrown across the desert and destined to link together cities and towns which do not yet exist. The whistle of the locomotive, more powerful than Amphion's lyre, was about to bid them rise from American soil. In Greek mythology, Amphion was a son of Zeus known for his extraordinary musical skill, using a golden lyre, a gift from Hermes, to move heavy stones with music. A lyre, L-Y-R-E, a stringed instrument like a small U-shaped harp with strings fixed to a crossbar, used especially in ancient Greece. A lyre. The whistle of the locomotive, more powerful than Amphion's lyre, was about to bid them rise from American soil. Fort McPherson was left behind at 8 in the morning, and 357 miles had yet to be traversed before reaching Omaha. The road followed the capricious windings of the southern branch of the Platte River on its left bank. At 9, the train stopped at the important town of North Platte, built between the 2 arms of the river, which rejoined each other around it and form a single artery, a large tributary whose waters empty into the Missouri a little above Omaha. The 101st meridian was passed. Mr. Fogg and his partners had resumed their game. No one, not even the dummy, complained of the length of the trip. Fix had begun by winning several guineas, which he seemed likely to lose, but he showed himself a not less eager whist player than Mr. Fogg. During the morning, chance distinctly favoured that gentleman. Trumps and honours were showered upon his hands. Once, having resolved on a bold stroke, he was on the point of playing a spade, when a voice behind him said, "I should play a diamond." Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Fix raised their heads and beheld Colonel Proctor. Stamp Proctor and Phileas Fogg recognized each other at once. "Ah, it's you, is it, Englishman?" cried the Colonel. "It's you who are going to play a spade." "And who plays it?" replied Phileas Fogg coolly, throwing down the 10 of spades. "Well, it pleases me to have it diamonds," replied Colonel Proctor in an insolent tone. He made a movement as if to seize the card which had just been played, adding, "You don't understand anything about whist." "Perhaps I do, as well as another," said Phileas Fogg, rising. "You have only to try, son of John Bull," replied the Colonel. Aouda turned pale, and her blood ran cold. She seized Mr. Fogg's arm and gently pulled him back. Passepartout was ready to pounce upon the American, who was staring insolently at his opponent. But Fix got up and, going to Colonel Proctor, said, "You forget that it is I with whom you have to deal, sir, for it was I whom you not only insulted, but struck." "Mr. Fix," said Mr. Fogg, "pardon me, but this affair is mine, and mine alone, and mine only. The Colonel has again insulted me by insisting that I should not play a spade, and he shall give me satisfaction for it."
"When and where you will," replied the American, "and with whatever weapon you choose."
Aouda in vain attempted to retain Mr. Fogg, as vainly did the detective endeavour to make the quarrel his. Passepartout wished to throw the Colonel out of the window, but a sign from his master checked him. Phileas Fogg left the car, and the American followed him upon the platform. "Sir," said Mr. Fogg to his adversary, "I am in a great hurry to get back to Europe, and any delay whatever will be greatly to my disadvantage."
"Well, what's that to me?"
replied the Colonel Proctor. "Sir," said Mr. Fogg very politely, "after our meeting at San Francisco, I determined to return to America and find you as soon as I had completed the business which called me to England."
"Really?"
"Will you appoint a meeting for 6 months hence?"
"Why not 10 years hence?"
"I say 6 months," returned Phileas Fogg, "and I shall be at the place of meeting promptly."
"All this is an evasion," cried Stamp Proctor. "Now or never."
"Very good. You are going to New York?"
"No."
"To Chicago?"
"No."
"To Omaha?"
"What difference is it to you? Do you know Plum Creek?"
"No," replied Mr. Fogg.
"It's the next station. The train will be there in an hour, and will stop there 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, several revolver shots could be exchanged."
"Very well," said Mr. Fogg. "I will stop at Plum Creek."
"And I guess you'll stay there too,"
added the American insolently. "Who knows?" replied Mr. Fogg, returning to the car as coolly as usual. He began to reassure Aouda, telling her that blusterers were never to be feared, and begged Fix to be his second at the approaching duel, a request which the detective could not refuse. Mr. Fogg resumed the interrupted game with perfect calmness. At 11 o'clock, the locomotive's whistle announced that they were approaching Plum Creek Station. Mr. Fogg rose, and followed by Fix, went out upon the platform. Passepartout accompanied him, carrying a pair of revolvers. Aouda remained in the car, as pale as death. The door of the next car opened, and Colonel Proctor appeared on the platform, attended by a Yankee of his own stamp as his second. But just as the combatants were about to step from the train, the conductor hurried up and shouted,
"You can't get off, gentlemen!"
"Why not?" asked the Colonel. "We are 20 minutes late, and we shall not stop."
"But I am going to fight a duel with this gentleman."
"I am sorry," said the conductor, "but we shall be off at once. There's the bell ringing now." The train started. "I'm really very sorry, gentlemen," said the conductor. "Under any other circumstances, I should have been happy to oblige you. But after all, as you have not had time to fight here, why not fight as we go along?"
"That wouldn't be convenient, perhaps, for this gentleman," said the Colonel in a jeering tone.
"It would be perfectly so," replied Phileas Fogg.
"Well, we are really in America," thought Passepartout, "and the conductor is a gentleman of the first order."
So, muttering, he followed his master. The two combatants, their seconds and the conductor, passed through the cars to the rear of the train. The last car was only occupied by a dozen passengers, whom the conductor politely asked if they would not be so kind as to leave it vacant for a few moments, as two gentlemen had an affair of honour to settle. The passengers granted the request with alacrity, and straightway disappeared on the platform. The car, which was some 50 feet long, was very convenient for their purpose. The adversaries might march on each other in the aisles and fire at their ease. Never was duel more easily arranged. Mr. Fogg and Colonel Proctor, each provided with 2 6-barreled revolvers, entered the car. The seconds, remaining outside, shut them in. They were to begin firing at the first whistle of the locomotive. After an interval of 2 minutes, what remained of the two gentlemen would be taken from the car. Nothing could be more simple. Indeed, it was all so simple that Fix and Passepartout felt their hearts beating as if they would crack. They were listening for the whistle agreed upon when suddenly savage cries resounded in the air, accompanied by reports which certainly did not issue from the car where the duelists were. The reports continued in front and the whole length of the train. Cries of terror proceeded from the interior of the cars. Colonel Proctor and Mr. Fogg, revolvers in hand, hastily quitted their prison and rushed forward where the noise was most clamorous. Then they perceived that the train was attacked by a band of Sioux. This was not the first attempt of these daring Indians, for more than once they had waylaid trains on the road. 100 of them had, according to their habit, jumped upon the steps without stopping the train, with the ease of a clown mounting a horse at full gallop. The Sioux were armed with guns from which came the reports, to which the passengers, who were almost all armed, responded by revolver shots. The Indians had first mounted the engine, and half stunned the engineer and stoker with blows from their muskets. A Sioux chief, wishing to stop the train but not knowing how to work the regulator, had opened wide instead of closing the steam valve, and the locomotive was plunging forward with terrific velocity. The Sioux had at the same time invaded the cars, skipping like enraged monkeys over the roofs, thrusting open the doors and fighting hand to hand with the passengers. Penetrating the baggage car, they pillaged it, throwing the trunks out of the train. The cries and shots were constant. The travellers defended themselves bravely. Some of the cars were barricaded and sustained a siege like moving forts, carried along at a speed of 100 miles an hour. Aouda behaved courageously from the first. She defended herself like a true heroine with a revolver, which she shot through the broken windows whenever a savage made his appearance. 20 Sioux had fallen mortally wounded to the ground, and the wheels crushed those who fell upon the rails as if they had been worms. Several passengers, shot or stunned, lay on the seats. It was necessary to put an end to the struggle, which had lasted for 10 minutes, and which would result in the triumph of the Sioux if the train was not stopped. Fort Kearny Station, where there was a garrison, was only 2 miles distant, but that once passed, the Sioux would be masters of the train between Fort Kearny and the station beyond. The conductor was fighting beside Mr. Fogg when he was shot and fell. At the same moment he cried, "Unless the train is stopped in 5 minutes, we are lost!" "It shall be stopped," said Phileas Fogg, preparing to rush from the car. "Stay, monsieur!" cried Passepartout. "I will go!" Mr. Fogg had not time to stop the brave fellow who, opening a door unperceived by the Indians, succeeded in slipping under the car, and while the struggle continued and the balls whizzed across each other over his head, he made use of his old acrobatic experience, and with amazing agility worked his way under the cars, holding on to the chains, aiding himself by the brakes and edges of the sashes, creeping from one car to another with marvellous skill, and thus gaining the forward end of the train. There, suspended by one hand between the baggage car and the tender, with the other he loosened the safety chains, but owing to the traction he would never have succeeded in unscrewing the yoking bar had not a violent concussion jolted this bar out. The train, now detached from the engine, remained a little behind, whilst the locomotive rushed forward with increased speed. Carried on by the force already acquired, the train still moved for several minutes, but the brakes were worked, and at last they stopped, less than 100 feet from Kearney Station. The soldiers of the fort, attracted by the shots, hurried up. The Sioux had not expected them and decamped in a body before the train entirely stopped. But when the passengers counted each other on the station platform, several were found missing, among others the courageous Frenchman whose devotion had just saved them. Chapter 30, in which Phileas Fogg simply does his duty. 3 passengers, including Passepartout, had disappeared. Had they been killed in the struggle? Were they taken prisoners by the Sioux? It was impossible to tell. There were many wounded, but none mortally. Colonel Proctor was one of the most seriously hurt. He had fought bravely, and a ball had entered his groin. He was carried into the station with the other wounded passengers to receive such attention as could be of avail. Aouda was safe, and Phileas Fogg, who had been in the thickest of the fight, had not received a scratch. Fix was slightly wounded in the arm, but Passepartout was not to be found, and tears coursed down Aouda's cheeks. All the passengers had got out of the train, the wheels of which were stained with blood. From the tires and spokes hung ragged pieces of flesh. As far as the eye could reach on the white plain behind, red trails were visible. The last Sioux were disappearing in the south along the banks of the Republican River. Mr. Fogg, with folded arms, remained motionless. He had a serious decision to make. Aouda, standing near him, looked at him without speaking, and he understood her look. If his servant was a prisoner, ought he not to risk everything to rescue him from the Indians? "I will find him, living or dead," he said quietly to Aouda. "Ah, Mr. Fogg!" cried she, clasping his hands and covering them with tears. "Living," added Mr. Fogg, "if we do not lose a moment." Phileas Fogg, by this resolution, inevitably sacrificed himself. He pronounced his own doom. The delay of a single day would make him lose the steamer at New York, and his bet would be certainly lost. But as he thought, "It is my duty," he did not hesitate. The commanding officer of Fort Kearney was there. 100 of his soldiers had placed themselves in a position to defend the station should the Sioux attack it. "Sir," said Mr. Fogg to the captain, 3 passengers have disappeared." "Dead?" asked the captain. Dead or prisoners? That is the uncertainty which must be solved. Do you propose to pursue the Sioux? That's a serious thing to do, sir, returned the captain. These Indians may retreat beyond the Arkansas, and I cannot leave the fort unprotected. The lives of 3 men are in question, sir, said Phileas Fogg. Doubtless, but can I risk the lives of 50 men to save 3? I don't know whether you can, sir, but you ought to do so. Nobody here, returned the other, has a right to teach me my duty. Very well, said Mr. Fogg coldly. I will go alone. You, sir, cried Fix, coming up. You go alone in pursuit of the Indians? Would you have me leave this poor fellow to perish, him to whom every one present owes his life? I shall go. No, sir, you shall not go alone, cried the captain, touched in spite of himself. No, you are a brave man. 30 volunteers, he added, turning to the soldiers. The whole company started forward at once. The captain had only to pick his men. 30 were chosen, and an old sergeant placed at their head. Thanks, Captain, said Mr. Fogg. Will you let me go with you? Asked Fix. Do as you please, sir. But if you wish to do me a favor, you will remain with Aouda, in case anything should happen to me. A sudden pallor overspread the detective's face. Pallor. Pallor, an unhealthy, pale appearance. Paleness, pallor. A sudden pallor overspread the detective's face. Separate himself from the man whom he had so persistently followed step by step. Leave him to wander about in this desert. Fix gazed attentively at Mr. Fogg, and, despite his suspicions and of the struggle which was going on within him, he lowered his eyes before that calm and frank look. I will stay, said he. A few moments after, Mr. Fogg pressed the young woman's hand, and, having confided to her his precious carpet bag, went off with the sergeant and his little squad. But, before going, he had said to the soldiers, My friends, I will divide $5,000 among you if we save the prisoners. It was then a little past noon. Aouda retired to a waiting room, and there she waited alone, thinking of the simple and noble generosity, the tranquil courage of Phileas Fogg. He had sacrificed his fortune, and was now risking his life, all without hesitation, from duty, in silence. Fix did not have the same thoughts, and could scarcely conceal his agitation. He walked feverishly up and down the platform, but soon resumed his outward composure. He now saw the folly of which he had been guilty in letting Fogg go alone. What? This man, whom he had just followed around the world, was permitted now to separate himself from him. He began to accuse and abuse himself, and, as if he were director of police, administered to himself a sound lecture for his greenness. I have been an idiot, he thought, and this man will see it. He is gone and won't come back. But how is it that I, Fix, who have in my pocket a warrant for his arrest, have been so fascinated by him? Decidedly, I am nothing but an ass. So reasoned the detective, while the hours crept by all too slowly. He did not know what to do. Sometimes he was tempted to tell Aouda all, but he could not doubt how the young woman would receive his confidences. What course should he take? He thought of pursuing Fogg across the vast, white plains. It did not seem impossible that he might overtake him. Footsteps were easily printed on the snow, but soon, under a new sheet, every imprint would be effaced. Fix became discouraged. He felt a sort of insurmountable longing to abandon the game altogether. He could now leave Fort Kearny Station and pursue his journey homeward in peace. Towards 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while it was snowing hard, long whistles were heard approaching from the east. A great shadow, preceded by a wild light, slowly advanced, appearing still larger through the mist, which gave it a fantastic aspect. No train was expected from the east, neither had there been time for the succour asked for by the telegraph to arrive. Succour. Succour. Assistance and support in times of hardship and distress. Aid. Succour. No train was expected from the east, neither had there been time for the succour asked for by telegraph to arrive. The train from Omaha to San Francisco was not due till the next day. The mystery was soon explained. The locomotive, which was slowly approaching with deafening whistles, was that which, having been detached from the train, had continued its route with such terrific rapidity. Carrying off the unconscious engineer and stoker, it had run several miles when, the fire becoming low for want of fuel, the steam had slackened, and it had finally stopped an hour after, some 20 miles beyond Fort Kearny. Neither the engineer nor the stoker was dead, and after remaining for some time in their swoon, had come to themselves. The train had then stopped. The engineer, when he found himself in the desert, and the locomotive without cars, understood what had happened. He could not imagine how the locomotive had become separated from the train, but he did not doubt that the train left behind was in distress. He did not hesitate what to do. It would be prudent to continue on to Omaha, for it would be dangerous to return to the train, which the Indians might still be engaged in pillaging. Nevertheless, he began to rebuild the fire in the furnace. The pressure again mounted, and the locomotive returned, running backwards to Fort Kearny. This it was which was whistling in the mist. The travellers were glad to see the locomotive resume its place at the head of the train. They could now continue the journey so terribly interrupted. Aouda, on seeing the locomotive come up, hurried out of the station and asked the conductor, "Are you going to start?" "At once, madam." "But the prisoners, our unfortunate fellow travellers?" "I cannot interrupt the trip," replied the conductor. "We are already 3 hours behind time." "And when will another train pass here from San Francisco?" "Tomorrow evening, madam." "Tomorrow evening? But then it will be too late. We must wait." "It is impossible," responded the conductor. "If you wish to go, please get in." "I will not go," said Aouda. Fix had heard this conversation. A little while before, when there was no prospect of proceeding on the journey, he had made up his mind to leave Fort Kearny. But now that the train was there, ready to start, and he had only to take his seat in the car, an irresistible influence held him back. The station platform burned his feet, and he could not stir. The conflict in his mind again began. Anger and failure stifled him. He wished to struggle on to the end. Meanwhile, the passengers and some of the wounded, among them Colonel Proctor, whose injuries were serious, had taken their places in the train. The buzzing of the overheated boiler was heard, and the steam was escaping from the valves. The engineer whistled, the train started, and soon disappeared, mingling its white smoke with the eddies of the densely falling snow. The detective had remained behind. Several hours passed. The weather was dismal, and it was very cold. Fix sat motionless on a bench in the station. He might have been thought asleep. Awuda, despite the storm, kept coming out of the waiting room, going to the end of the platform and peering through the tempest of snow as if to pierce the mist which narrowed the horizon around her, and to hear, if possible, some welcome sound. She heard and saw nothing. Then she would return, chilled through, to issue out again after the lapse of a few moments, but always in vain. Evening came, and the little band had not returned. Where could they be? Had they found the Indians, and were they having a conflict with them, or were they still wandering amid the mist? The commander of the fort was anxious, though he tried to conceal his apprehensions. As night approached, the snow fell less plentifully, but it became intensely cold. Absolute silence rested on the plains. Neither flight of bird nor passing of beast troubled the perfect calm. Throughout the night, Awuda, full of sad forebodings, her heart stifled with anguish, wandered about on the verge of the plains. Her imagination carried her far off and showed her innumerable dangers. What she suffered through the long hours it would be impossible to describe. Fix remained stationary in the same place, but did not sleep. Once a man approached and spoke to him, and the detective merely replied by shaking his head. Thus the night passed. At dawn, the half-extinguished disk of the sun rose above a misty horizon, but it was now possible to recognize objects 2 miles off. Phileas Fogg and the squad had gone southward. In the south all was still vacancy. It was then 7 o'clock. The captain, who was really alarmed, did not know what course to take. Should he send another detachment to the rescue of the first? Should he sacrifice more men with so few chances of saving those already sacrificed? His hesitation did not last long, however. Calling one of his lieutenants, he was on the point of ordering a reconnaissance when gunshots were heard. Was it a signal? The soldiers rushed out of the fort, and 1/2 mile off they perceived a little band returning in good order. Mr. Fogg was marching at their head, and just behind him were Passepartout and the other 2 travelers rescued from the Sioux. They had met and fought the Indians 10 miles south of Fort Kearny. Shortly before the detachment arrived, Passepartout and his companions had begun to struggle with their captors, 3 of whom the Frenchman had felled with his fists, when his master and the soldiers hastened up to their relief. All were welcomed with joyful cries. Phileas Fogg distributed the reward he had promised to the soldiers, while Passepartout, not without reason, muttered to himself, "It must certainly be confessed that I cost my master dear." Fix, without saying a word, looked at Mr. Fogg, and it would have been difficult to analyze the thoughts which struggled within him. As for Awuda, She took her protector's hand and pressed it in her own, too much moved to speak. Meanwhile, Passepartout was looking about for the train. He thought he should find it there, ready to start for Omaha, and he hoped that the time lost might be regained.
"The train! The train!"
cried he. "Gone," replied Fix. "And when does the next train pass here?" said Phileas Fogg. "Not till this evening." "Ah," returned the impassible gentleman quietly.